You have just returned from a visit to Patriarch Kirill in Moscow. Could you tell us a little bit about the purpose of the visit?
The World Council of Churches made it very clear in its Central Committee and also at the last assembly that we as the WCC need to be doing as much as possible in addressing the war in Ukraine. So the primary purpose of the visit to Patriarch Kirill was to talk about the war and to reflect in terms of the Russian Orthodox Church and its own position as that is concerned, but also to address the issue of the unity of the Orthodox family, because we have seen clearly within the WCC how the issue of the war and the different perspectives have actually started to impact on the unity of the Orthodox churches. And so our task is to address those specific issues in terms of trying to see how we can move forward.
Some people might be critical that WCC are paying a visit to Patriarch in the light of the circumstances and the position of the war. What would you say to them?
I'm aware that social media people have already expressed, a few people have expressed some critical concerns and talked about the fact that we are taking photos with Patriarch Kirill, knowing particularly his own position on the war and all of that. And that may be true, and we certainly respect people's perspectives on these things. But I want to say very clearly and strongly that the WCC does not have the luxury of sitting back and doing nothing. There's a war going on, and we have to address this. But also, more importantly, the Russian Orthodox Church is one of the largest members of the World Council of Churches. So we have a right and an obligation to visit with them, to listen to them, and of course to even challenge them on their particular positions as related to the war. So we have no opportunity to sit back as armchair critics and do nothing about it. We have to get involved.
So what did you discuss with Patriarch Kirill? Did you also go into in detail about his role and responsibility as the Patriarch of a church during the war?
Yes, of course. I mean, four important things that we raised in our conversation with him. The first thing is the war in Ukraine, and quite strongly said that the war must come to an end. We have visited the Ukraine. We have seen the impacts of what is happening to the people, the loss of lives and properties, and how this war is senseless in terms of its purpose, but also destroying people, which is really unacceptable. We related to him what we have seen and said we need to work towards the cessation of this particular war. But also we expressed concern about the Orthodox family and the different views. So the second point that we raised was, how do we work together for the unity of the Orthodox family? Now, one must really understand that in this context of Ukraine and Russia, the Orthodox Christians are in huge numbers. And they can play a very significant role and have an absolute powerful influence in terms of what they can do about the situation. They can talk against the war, they can talk in favor of peace, and therefore the Orthodox family and the unity of the Orthodox family is essential in this. And therefore we focus quite strongly on the fact that we need to bring the Orthodox community together in unity. So that was the second point. The third point is that we asked, what role can the churches play in terms of bringing unity, in terms of addressing the issues of war, and bringing a stop to what is taking place in this current situation. So that was the third element of our discussion. And the fourth aspect was to talk about the possibility of a roundtable and how we can come together and take this conversation further in dialogue so that we as churches, firstly, seek in unity amongst ourselves. How then can we actually work towards seeking peace in the context of Ukraine and Russia at this given time?
Thank you, Dr. Pillay. Could you tell us a little bit about the reactions from the Patriarch's side and his delegation? Could you also describe a little bit the structure and the mood of the meeting? Because you went with the delegation to Moscow for only this meeting.
Yes, indeed. The meeting was a very cordial, receptive meeting. We were very well received by the Patriarch, which I'm very grateful for. There was a great conversation in terms of information. And of course, it wasn't an easy meeting because we're dealing with difficult situations and perspectives. So it was quite tough and very engaging and very challenging, but in a very cordial spirit as Christians, trying to understand and discern together. But the issues are complex and complicated, and therefore the discussions would inevitably be difficult, and difficult it was. But the meeting started off with Patriarch Kirill making a presentation, and in that presentation he basically gave the sides of his own perspective, but he spoke firstly about the concern of attacks on Christians in the world, which we totally endorse as Christians. Secondly, he spoke about the issues of the unity of the Orthodox family and his concern. He apportioned blame to certain quarters in terms of the Ukraine situation, which is obviously debatable. And then he spoke particularly about the issues of the roundtable that we have raised, and he gave his thoughts about that. And then also we discussed with him how we can take this further. In my particular responses to his presentation included these 4 points that I've spoken about: the war, the unity of the Orthodox family, the role of Christians and churches, and especially the context of the Ukraine situation and the ROC relationship. And we engaged on that. And then, of course, further discussions on the round table. I might say that this conversation actually took place for more than 2.5 hours. It was not a short discussion. We had 1.5 hours in the boardroom and a further hour in the dining room where we continued to engage this challenging discussion. I am aware that there is a video clip in circulation of the Patriarch actually making a presentation, and that is true. He made a presentation, as I said, but what it doesn't cover adequately is our responses as a WCC to the points that have been made and to the decisions that we actually move forward towards. So it's a rather unfortunate thing that it gives that kind of perspective only, but I would like to say that it was a very detailed response from the side of the WCC. And in that time that we've had together, we made sure that we put on the table quite solidly what we felt about the situation of the war and the unity of the Orthodox family.
So then I understand that you met with them for 2.5 hours, but we have only seen the video clip for 21 minutes. It was only the first part of the meeting, and then you continued to discuss more also on the round table. Is it possible for you to mention what do you have in mind? We have had already 2 round tables last year. Now a third is coming up. What is the plan for the round table, and who would be present at the table?
So the WCC delegation has already met with the churches in the Ukraine. We met with the Ukraine Orthodox Church and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and we put to them the idea of the round table, and they were showing very keen interest in being part of the round table. The idea of the round table is to get the Ukraine churches to a discussion on the first day, and on the second day to have a discussion with the Russian Orthodox Church, and on the third day to bring them all again together to be able to discuss the issues of the war and how we may work together towards peaceful solutions, but also how they can work together to restore the unity of the Orthodox family. The responses, as I said, from the Ukraine churches was very good. So we put the same to the Russian Orthodox Church. And I must say that at first, the Patriarch did express some concerns about the possibility of a roundtable, and his focus was specifically on the issue that there are other external influences. And he particularly mentioned the issue of the USA. And he said, unless we resolve those kind of issues and influences, it would be difficult to come to a roundtable. But I had to put it to the Patriarch that the task of the WCC is not to get involved in politics. We do not have a political agenda. And likewise, we would like to believe that the task of the church is to work with discerning the gospel. The Bible calls us to peace. Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and he calls us to live in peace with each other. And so we had to put the scriptures in front of us to be able to say, politics aside, nationalism aside, how do we actually understand what the scripture calls us to do? So let us start thinking spiritually, let us start thinking religiously, and let us open up the scriptures and ask, what is God calling us to do? Before we get influenced by these other forces. And I think that helped us to navigate the position. But also, in the end, the discussion came to the stage where the Patriarch was able to say, we will have some internal dialogue amongst ourselves as the Russian Orthodox Church, and we as the WCC will continue to work on the concept paper of bringing the roundtable together. So that's a very positive indication in terms of the way forward. And I must say that I was duly impressed with that particular stance, but expect and hope that all of these things will come together in the end to achieve the purposes we are trying to actually bring together.
Thank you. You have also been visiting Ukraine and then finally also Moscow in almost 10 days' times. What do you take with you as the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches? You have described what you have in your mind with the round table, but you have also been in the war zone. You have met with the churches on the ground, tried to find a way forward.
Well, I think, one of the things we have to realize is that there is no quick fix solutions. The situation, the issues are complex and complicated. One has to give time to that. It's not going to change overnight. The war has been with us for over a year now. Churches are starting to get into continued conflicts over these issues. My main concern is the continued rift that we are experiencing between the Orthodox churches, and that needs to be addressed. And I do believe that when we speak into that, and if we have one voice as churches, then we might be able to speak in that unified voice into the context of the war and to all the authorities that continue to perpetuate this unnecessary and really unneeded experience of the war. So as WCC General Secretary, I realize that it's going to take a lot more time, patience, and willingness to journey with the people concerned. The issues are broad and complicated from a variety of sources. It's not just only a matter of spirituality and religious interpretations, but there's a great sense of political interference and interventions. And unfortunately, the saddest thing for me is that churches tend to be more attracted to the issues of nationalism than they are to the gospel message. And I really pray that a day will come that when we can see firstly what God calls us to do, and that we remain faithful to the calling of God in the context in which we live, be it in the Ukraine-Russia context or anywhere else in the world.
So to be very, very practical, the Executive Committee will also meet this week. So what is the next phase of your planning? And it's coming towards just peace. And you had also a meeting with Pope Francis for 1.5 months ago. So what is it's on the agenda for you as the General Secretary?
Well, I realize that there are many churches that are working with the Ukraine situation. And somehow I wish that we could pool our efforts together so that we can be unified in terms of what we're saying, but also it can give us strength in terms of our witness in this context. So I do hope, I'm aware that the Roman Catholic Church is also embarking on certain peace missions, and that's well accepted and needed. And also I know other churches are doing similar initiatives. But I hope that the WCC can be a platform that we all can work together, especially churches that are working with us as the Council of Churches in a grouped effort to be able to address these things, to participate fully, coming from our respective church traditions, but yet realizing the common elements in terms of what we are facing and how our strength can be noted and seen if we are working together. So yes, we have to work with that. In terms of the steps forward, we have met now with the churches in the Ukraine and also with the Russian Orthodox Church. We have spoken to them about engagement. I will now, as General Secretary, be in touch with these respective churches and say to them, yes, you have spoken with us. We now want a final commitment towards the process of dialogue. And once we get that, we will then actually set up the dialogue roundtable. And we are working on a concept paper that will integrate the different views that we've actually embraced and listened to in these visits. And we'll put that together and then see if there's an agreement amongst us in terms of the roundtable, where it will take place, who will be part of it, and the actual agenda in terms of the discussion. So we will process this. We are hoping to have the roundtable possibly in October this year or sometime later in this year, but it will take place as soon as possible. So we have put together these measures and directions, and we're hoping that in a short space of time that there will be consensus amongst us as far as the roundtable is concerned, and that we can meet together as soon as possible to start this initial process of dialogue. So we understand that it's not going to be a one event and then it's done. It's going to be a continued discussion, and it will take as many meetings as possible as we deal with the complicated issues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pillay. Any final comments to the fellowship?
The fellowship has said to us, quite clearly through the assembly that we cannot remain silent or quiet. We must get engaged on dealing with the Ukraine issue, as with other war conflicts and situations in different parts of the world. And we are dealing with that as well as we address those situations. But since we're specifically talking about Ukraine, the mandate is that we must continue to work on this issue. So I'd like to say to our member churches and to all those who are partners with us in the World Council of Churches, continue to pray for the situation, pray for the people in Ukraine and Russia, pray that this war may come to an end, pray that the attempts that we are making with regards to unity in the Orthodox family and among churches in general will materialize. Pray that we will remain true to the gospel in all of these endeavors, so that we may indeed create and work towards a world that speaks of the justice, of God's justice, and of peace in where we live. And so my final word would be, let's keep on keeping on, and let's never give up. There are great complexities, as I've said, in the situation. There will always be voices of criticism, and that we accept. But let's not work from a basis of emotionalism and be quick to be critical from the armchair perspective. Let's understand that we all are struggling, and as God's people, we are working together, and we must work together to be able to find solutions to these difficult, complex problems. But especially when a war is in our presence, it is a right and responsibility of Christians and of all people to say enough is enough. Let's stop this and work towards peace.
Thank you, Dr. Pillay.
Thank you.